Hey guys, quick heads up before I start the video. The link down below takes you to my Patreon where you can download the project files for this video. Also gain access to my premium tutorials and in-depth courses where we build games together from start to finish. Check out my Patreon below, gain direct access to years of experience so that you can start working on your dream game tomorrow. Hello everybody and welcome back to a new episode of my multiplayer Bean Battle Royale tutorial series. So in this episode we are actually going to be working on the actual zone for our Bean Battle Royale. So what you see in typical Battle Royale games is that you have the zone and then you have some kind of a meter on the top right of your screen most of the times, and that meter will count down and it will then tell you when the new zone is coming in. And that is exactly what we're going to be working on in this video. And before we get started, I want to show you guys the new assets that I have that we are going to be working with. So if we go into our asset folder and then go into props, then into zone, then in the newest and latest Patreon project, you will now find this folder called zone, in which we have a mesh of a zone, which is this mesh. And what it basically is it is just basically a cylinder. And then we have this material over here, which is a hologram material that I use here. Now, for those of you that are following along and are not subscribed to my Patreon, so don't have access to these files, then I quickly want to explain what type of a prop you will need for this tutorial. So basically, since it is a zone, you could either make it a square or something like a cylinder shape. So if we take a look here at the cylinder shape like this one, what we are going to do with the cylinder shape is that instead of having it be a blocking collision, we are going to say that the cylinder shape is going to be overlapping with our characters. So if we scale this cylinder shape to super big, and I will use mine here, and so I get the scaling tool and I make it huge. So let's say something like this. Then what is going to happen that if this volume here overlaps, then we can detect if the players are inside of it or if the players are outside of it. So based on that collision, which we're going to be setting to overlap, we can use the overlap event begin overlap and overlap. We are simply going to use this to then determine if the player is inside of the zone. If the player is inside of the zone, we are then not going to show post-process of the player being outside of the zone, and we are also not going to damage the player. Now, if the player is outside of the zone, then we're simply going to apply a little post-process filter to the player to properly feedback that he or she is outside of the zone, and then we will be applying the damage. So one thing that you do have to keep in mind when working with a cylinder like this is that if we take a quick look at the actual mesh of it, then we see that the mesh looks round. But then what we do also see is that if we look at the simple collision, which is the collision that we use, that the collision is not perfectly round. So this is the automatic collision that Unreal Engine has generated on this cylinder shape that I exported from Blender. And what we see here is that we have these spots over here where we basically are not fully aligned to the circle. So what you should do if you want to use this accurately is that you need to have a shape that is super accurate to how round the actual cylinder is. So if your collision is like mine here, where it has this little gray areas, then that means that visually, if this is super large scale and the player is super small, then visually the player walks outside of the circle, but not yet outside of the overlap here. So I will fix this in my little Patreon project, but just keep in mind that your collision should be completely accurate to what your mesh actually is. Otherwise you got that disalignment, which we'll probably notice in a little bit. So the player might be outside here, but might not actually get seen as outside yet. Okay, and if you don't have the material that I have, then you can simply make yourself a little transparent type material, or there's other tutorials on YouTube about how to get some kind of a cool glowing material. But since the focus of this video is on the multiplayer and the programming side of things, we're simply going to get right into it and start programming the zone for our multiplayer Bean Battle Royale. So the first thing that I want to make is the widget. So if we head over to our game widget, then I'll just simply make a new folder and I'm going to call it zone. Inside of here, I'm going to right click, go to user interface, widget blueprint, user widget, type in WB, zone, counts down, WB standing for widget blueprint. Then if I open this up, then I want to get a border in here. I'm going to set my screen to desired on screen. Then I'm going to drag some text into the border. I'm going to right click the text and wrap it with a vertical box, which we find over here. Then I'm going to duplicate the text once more, Then I'm going to select my border, click on the brush color, make it fully black, and then put the A to 0.6 to give it a transparency. Then we're going to select the vertical box, give it 12 padding. Then we're going to select the top text. I'm going to make that 12. And the bottom text, I'm going to make it 18. Now the top text here, we want it to display something along the lines of time till next zone. And then this time over here will be the time till the next zone. So as a preview text, I'll be doing 60 seconds here. Then this text needs to be a variable because it's going to be changing dynamically. So we're going to call it time till next zone underscore text and click on is variable true, hit compile and save. Now this widget is going to be reading from our game state. So if we head over to our graph, then we can get our event construct. Then we're going to type, then we're going to right click, type in get game state. Out of here, we're going to drag and type in cast to gameplay game state. And now out of this gameplay game state, I want to get a reference. So we're going to promote this to the variable so that we have a reference of our gameplay game state. And then inside of our gameplay game state, we are going to be coding the logic for the whole countdown of the actual zone. So the zone itself will not be doing that. Our game state will basically be communicating to the zone that it needs to shrink, shrink, and shrink. It will also be responsible for actually spawning the zone somewhere. So that is why we basically get this reference from our game state here. So what we're going to do is with the text here selected, we're going to click on bind, create the binding. Then we're going to rename the binding here to have a nicer text. And then for now, let's just put a little dash in here, hit compile, save, and there we go. Now we can close out the countdown for a while, and then we can head over to our HUD widget over here, in which we then need to add it. So if we go here to user advanced, then we see zone countdown, open it up. And I don't mean user advanced, I mean user created. Then this one, we want to anchor it to the top right. We want to give it -50 on the X and something like 200 or perhaps 150. Hit compile, save, and there we go. So now we added the zone to the player screen. Then I think up next, we should actually be making the actual zone actor. But before we make the actor, we should actually be making the zone spawner. So we are going to have some similar logic to how we have this volume over here that spawns all of the loot crates. So as we've seen before, we use a certain type of a volume in this series, and then we get a random point within the volume, and based on that point we then spawn our loot boxes with a line trace straight down. Well, we're going to do somewhat similar logic over here, but then instead of actually getting line traces straight down, we're simply going to use a volume so that we can then easily find a random point within that volume, and that is going to be the endpoint where the circle will stop. So every time that you play the game, the circle will end in a different location. So first of all, let's make that actors that we can actually start spawning our zone. So if we head over here to actors, then we're going to make a new folder. We're going to call it zone. Then we open it up, right click, blueprint class actor, and call this bp_zone spawner. Then at the same time, we also want to go to blueprints actor and just type in bp_zone to get our zone in here. Then we're going to hit save all. Now let's open up our zone spawner, make this bigger. So the first thing that we're going to add is that volume, like I said. So if we click here on the plus, then we can type in call, and then we get a box collision. Now the box extent, we're going to be setting this to 20,000 by 20,000. So that gives us this box. Hit compile, save. So we can then drag this guy in, go to the details panel, scroll up. So we want to set its location to 0, 0. And the height here, we can set it to something like 3000. So we're not really going to be using the height of this volume. We're simply going to be using how big it is. And then we use this volume to get a random coordinate inside of it. So let's do that logic right now. So if we go over to our event graph, then we want to get our begin play logic. Then we want to remove all these basic events. Then we want to right click, type in custom event and create ourselves an event called spawn zone. So this will be spawning an actor. So we type in spawn actor from class. Then we can hook this up. Now the actor that we want to spawn is our zone that we just made. So this one. After we spawn the actor, we want to destroy the zone spawner. So this one, we're going to do destroy actor, because we do not need this whole collision box to be here once we've already basically spawned our zone. And then off of the spawn transform here, we're going to drag off it and click on make transform. Let's put this to the right a little bit. Then out of the transform, we're going to split here our location. And then what we want to do is that we want to get our box. Now out of the box, we want to get the world location. We also want to get out of here, get unskilled box extent. And then we want to type in random point in bounding box. So for the center, that's our location. And for the half size, that's our unskilled box extent. Then we want to right click this one, split it. And then the X goes in here and the Y in here. And the height at which we want to spawn our zone, let's do that at min 50, minus 50, so that it basically spawns even if the landscape is lower than 0, which it sometimes is, because we got these little ponds here that are a bit lower. So let's say the zone would end in some lower area like that, then we do want the zone to still be reaching above the landscape and not be floating in the air. So that is why I spawn it at minus 50 there. So this logic looks all fine to me. So this is it for the zone spawner. Then let's hit compile and save and close this one. Then next up, let's code the actual zone. So if we open this guy up, make it bigger. And the first thing that we want to add is that static mesh of the zone. So if we do static mesh, then I'm going to right click this and call it SM zone. Now in here, we're going to select our zone static mesh. So I should have that over here. There we go. Now it should be very big to start off with. So a nice value I found out was 1000 by 1000 by 1000. So there we go. So this is for my island, this is a good zone size. Then we want to scroll down here to the collision preset, which we want to set to overlap all dynamic. And then once you put it to that one, then we want to change it to custom. And then the interaction channel, instead of blocking it, because that would block our line trace to be able to interact with the loot crate, we want to set this one to ignored. Then we hit compile, save, and then head over to the event graph, where we remove these two events, but we keep the begin play. So the first piece of logic that we need to do here is that we want to get our zone, and then we want to get the world skill. And then the world skill here, we're going to right click it, split it, and then we're simply going to save one of the values. So we're going to be working here with a float instead of an entire vector. So why am I doing this? Well, basically the zone starts off at 1000 by 1000 by 1000, and then we want to decrease the size all the time. So the first size that we want is just the default size that it is. So let's promote this to variable, and then we call this target size. And we hook this up to the begin play. So on begin play, we basically get a reference of what the starting size is. And now we do only want to do that on the server. So if we drag out of here, type in switch has authority, then there we go. And this variable here, we want it to replicate. Hit compile and save. Then we also want to set up the default value for this variable to be the same as our mesh. So in here, we're going to type in 1000, compile, save. There we go. Then next up, we're going to code the event so that we can actually shrink the size of this zone. So if we right click, type in custom event, then we're going to type in shrink. And then the logic here is that we basically want to get this skill again. So we copy this skill over here. Then we want to get the current skill, which might be 1000. And then we want to remove, like, let's say, so minus. Then we want to remove, let's say, 250 units off of that 1000. And then we want to clamp this value over here so that we cannot get that the zone is going below a size of 0. So if we type in here clamp load, we get this one. So the maximum size is going to be the 1000, which is our default value, and the minimum is going to be 0, so that the zone cannot be below 0 size. So this is going to be our new target size. So we hook this up like this. There we go. So basically we start out at 1000, so that's what we set it to. It is here 1000 and the default value is 1000. And then whenever we start to call the shrink event, which our game state is going to be calling, so we have a counter in a little bit in the game state will then basically call the shrink event. Then we want to just subtract 250 and then set that as our new target size. So then off of here, we can do a little print string. And then we can type in something over here along the lines of zone is shrinking. And then let's put that on the screen for like 5 seconds, just for debugging purposes. Hit compile, save. Then next up, we're going to use event tick to basically actually shrink the zone. So then yet again, we're going to get our world skill over here. So our static mesh and then get world skill. Then what we're going to do is that we're going to say if the size is 0, and then we're going to hold B, left click to get a branch. Here we go. So if the size is 0, then we basically don't want to do anything because then we're done shrinking. So then we're just going to go off of here. But if the size is not 0, then we want to basically interp, so float interp towards the new target size. So if the game state calls a new size here, so let's go from 1000 to 750, then we want this event tick to basically interp towards that size. So the way that we're going to do that is that first of all, we're going to drag out of here our static mesh, drag off of it and type in set world skill 3D. And then hook this up to the false, and then we're going to split it over here. So we're going to set the new skill, and then the way that we're going to set it is that we're going to type in f interp. So f interp 2. Now our delta is going to be our delta seconds. This value, we're going to put it in the x and the y. Now we do not want to scale our z value here, so our z values should remain to the same 1000, because otherwise the zone is also going to shrink in height, and we don't want that. We only want it to shrink on the x and the y, so that's why we plug this in here. Then for our current, we're simply going to use the x, so we don't have to use x and y, because they're always similar, because the zone is shrinking at the uniform scale basically. And then for the target, we're simply going to be plugging in our target size over here. So whenever the target size changes, which it does whenever the shrink event is called, then we're going to go from the current scale to the target scale. So from 1000 to 750, it will then scale it on the X and the Y, and the Z will remain the same. And then the shrink gets called again sometime later by the game state. So then it goes from 750 to 500. It will go here from 750 to 500 and it will scale again. And since this variable here is replicated, then this will automatically go correct on the server and the client, because both the server and the client are executing this tick, trying to basically execute this lerp to scale the zone. So that is all the logic for the scaling. Then the last logic here is if we select our zone, then we want to get our overlap event so that we can understand when the player is inside of the zone or outside of the zone. So we click here on the plus, then click on the zone again, then click here on the plus. Then we got our begin overlap and end overlap events. So what I'm going to do is that, well, first of all, we only want to know the overlap event for the characters. So we're going to drag out of here, type in get class. And then here we're going to say, is the class equal to our gameplay character? So if we type in gameplay, then we get BP gameplay character. Now, if that is true, then we want to basically cast to our gameplay character. And then on the gameplay character here, we want to do some logic that we then say whether or not we are inside of or outside of the zone. And then we want the character itself to basically handle what it has to do when it's inside or outside of the zone. So we'll set that up in a little bit. But first of all, in between here, we want a switch as authority. So only the server should detect these overlap events. So here we go. And then, like I said, so here we need to basically communicate to the character that we are inside of the zone. And here we need to communicate that we are outside of the zone. So right now, if we quickly set that up, then we head over to our character. So we go to core, character, zoom out a little bit. So then we're going to make a new variable here and we're going to call it outside zone question mark. And this is going to be of the type rep notify. So when the value changes, we get this corresponding function here. And then inside of this function, we can encode the logic for what has to happen when you are detected as inside of the zone or detected as outside of the zone. So inside of the zone blueprint again, then we're basically going to drag out of here and type in set zone. So then we can see this new variable that we just made. And then, like I said, here it needs to be true that we're basically, or sorry, this is begin overlap. So here it needs to be false, so we're not outside the zone. And here it needs to be true, so that we are outside of the zone. So since we need to reuse this logic, we're going to select it all, right click, collapse to function, and simply call this something like handle underscore zone logic. We're going to put it up here, open it up. Then we see that this pin is the same object as this one. So this second object pin can go away. This object name, we can rename it to something like actor. And then the value here for this variable is going to go into here. Then we hit compile and save. Then if we go to the event graph, then we need to right click the node and then click refresh node. Hit compile, save once more. That clears the error. So over here, we are going to say if we overlapped and we're not outside the zone, then we're going to drag the function in again and hook it up to other actor. So if we end the overlap with the zone, then we are outside of the zone. Then we hit compile, save. There we go. And then the last thing that we need to ensure, since we use replicate variables here, is if we click on the class, then we want to set replicates to true, because otherwise zero replication will work. And since we're working with a Battle Royale here, so some things are at great distances, and this is a very important actor, then we also want to turn on here always relevant to true, so that even the client can also see this actor at great distances, which for this zone actor is very important. Then we can now close out our zone blueprint and then hit save all once more. Then we can head over to our character blueprint, in which we then want to basically handle what happens whenever we are in or outside of the zone. So to talk about that a little bit, if we are outside of the zone, then first of all, we want to damage the character. And second of all, we also want to show the character visually that you are outside the zone. So we want to do something to the post-processing basically. So we're going to go here to components and click on plus and then type in post. And then we see post-process. Then this one over here, we're going to go to our color grading, midtones, and then we're simply going to just, let's do the gain a little bit to make it somewhat blue. So if we go over here, we can make it somewhat blue. So I don't know, just find a blue color that you think is nice. So something like this, and then you can close this again. And then by default, we want this post-process to not be visible. So the visibility by default needs to be turned off, because otherwise, if you turn it on and then hit play, then you're going to see that everything is very blue. So this is basically the effect that we want to show the player when the player is outside of the zone, to feedback that to the player. So by default, like I said, we're going to turn this off. Check out Cactus Center right now on Steam and Early Access. It's a very fun multiplayer video game, cheaper than a Starbucks coffee. So if you want to have a good time with your friends or strangers, click that link down below. And I appreciate every single one of you. And enjoy the rest of the video. Bye! And then next up, we have our outside zone variable here, which goes to true or false, depending on whether or not we're in the zone or out the zone, which fires a rep notify. And then this rep notify, we want that. So for those of you who don't know, rep notify occurs on the server and on all the clients. So we want this rep notify to basically handle the post process and to handle damaging us as the player. But we're going to make a custom event here in the graph, and then the rep notify will call this custom event. So if we right click, type in custom event, then we're going to call this something like handle underscore zone. So this is our character handling the zone. So when we're handling the zone, it is important whether or not we are outside the zone. So if we hold B left click and get a branch, then we can say if we are outside the zone, we want to do this. If we're inside the zone, we want to do this. So inside of our rep notify, we're going to call this event. So here we're going to do handle zone. So whenever the value of the rep notify changes, this gets called, and it then calls our event inside of the graph here, in which we will actually execute our logic right now. So the first thing that we want to do is that, well, we have to keep in mind that since this is called by rep notify, happens on server and client. So on the server and client, we first want to change our post process. So we want to set this one to set visibility. So whenever we are outside the zone, we want to set the visibility to true. And then whenever we are inside the zone, we want to set our visibility to off again. So this happens on server and all clients, and then on the server only. So if we type in switch has authority, then on the server here, we now want to basically handle damaging us as the player. And we also on the server want to handle us no longer damaging as the player when we get back into the zone again. So we're going to drag off of here, type in set timer by event. So this one. And then we want to do this. So this whatever you set this time to is how fast the player will get damaged whenever the player is outside the zone. So let's say every second we want to loop. So every second we want to apply some damage. So turn on 1 second and looping. And then get out of event here, drag add custom event. And I call this something like zone damage. So every second if you're outside of the zone, we're going to be applying zone damage. Now, how are we going to do that? So first of all, we're going to basically drag off here and then type in apply damage. And then we get this node that we used earlier. So the guns used this as well, for example. So the damaged actor is then in this case going to be ourselves as the character. So we are the ones receiving the damage. Now in here we can type how much damage we want the zone to do. So let's type in 5 damage as an example. And then our instigator here, we saw before that we used that inside of our kill feed. So the instigator is going to be our zone actor. So what we're going to do to get a references to that one is get all actors of class. And then we'll hook this guy up like this. And then we're going to call it here the zone. So the zone. And we want to just get a copy of the one at index 0, which is the only one available to us. So instead of event instigator, we coded some logic. If there is no event instigator, which needs to be a player controller, then we're simply going to use the damage causer as the name. So the damage causer is going to be our zone. So we can also display inside of the kill feed that the player died because of the zone, for example. Okay, then we hit compile and save. So this is what we want to do whenever we are outside the zone. Now here for the event timer, we're going to save the timer handler here. So we're going to type in timer handler th_zone and then hook this up here. And then whenever you are not outside of the zone anymore, which means you're inside of the zone, then we want to basically clear this timer handler. So we drag it in, then we can drag off here, type in clear and invalidate handle, timer by handle, and there we go. Okay guys, and then we want to make one change. So we basically have to make sure that we only run is visible on the local version of the client. So if we run it like right now, then what we see is that the rep notify fires on server and on all clients. So also the clients that do not own this character, also the clients whose this is not their character basically, they also run this logic because it's rep notify. So for setting the post-process visibility, we need to ensure that only the local version does that, because what otherwise happens is that a player walks outside of the zone, you receive the rep notify for that player, then you turn on the post-process, and then that basically means that, well, that you see the color on your screen changing when another person walks out of the scene. So to avoid that, we are going to, let's put this all to the side a little bit. So we're going to get this somewhere over here, and then this event can go down a little bit because that's all good, but it just has to do with these two. So we get this down, then we basically want to split this logic up, and we want to hold S to get a sequence. If you don't have that, you can right click and type in flow control, and then over here down here you will find sequence. You can also just type in sequence. So the sequence, we're going to hook that up. Well, one thing that we want to do is on the server, we want to start our zone damage event. So that's this logic. And then another thing that we want to do is that locally controlled logic. So here we do is locally controlled. And then we hold B and left click to get a branch. We plug this in here, plug this in here. So that's all good for this setup. And then we want to do the similar setup down here. So this clear and invalidate timer logic, that one we just want to only do on the server. So we get our switch has authority. Then we copy the sequence as well. So let's split this one up. So we plug the sequence in here. Then we get the is locally controlled. We plug that guy in here. So locally we turn off that post process. And then on the server here, so off of the authority pin, we clear the timer. So there we go. So it looks a bit messy right now, but you can just put a big comment around this and call it something like handle zone logic. Hit compile, save, and there we go. And then the last thing of the last piece of the puzzle that we now need to do is that we need to start coding the actual logic for the whole countdown stuff so that the zone actually gets communicated to and starts counting down. So for that, we're going to go over to our gameplay folder, gameplay game state, and open this guy up. Then we want to go to our event graph here. So we want to add 2 new variables. So if we click here on the plus, then the first variable that we want to add is the time between the zones. So this is how long it takes between each zone, basically. So this one we're going to make an integer, and then the next one is going to be our actual zone countdown. Also of the type integer. Hit compile and save. Now for the default values, the time between the zones, typically in a Battle Royale, this is like 2 minutes. But since we have to show it all here in a YouTube video, I'm going to set it to something like 25 seconds. But this is one of those parameters that you can change just by whatever design you like for your game. So time between zones, it's going to be 25. And then the zone countdown, by default, we're going to set it to -1. Hit compile and save. And then just like we did over here with this countdown logic, we're going to do the same for the zone. So if we right click and type in custom event, then we're going to type countdown underscore zone. So whenever doing a countdown, we first of all want to delay it by 1 second each time. So after a second, what do we want to do? We want to get the current zone countdown, subtract 1 out of it, and then set that as our new zone countdown. There we go. Let's put that somewhere like here, compile, save. And then this zone countdown, we want to make this a rep notify, so that every time that we set the value to a new value, so every time that we count down, we want to basically execute the rep notify, in which we then check if we are already at 0, so that the zone should shrink again. If we're already at 0, so that the zone should shrink again, etc, etc. But the first thing that we want to do is that we actually want to now communicate to our zone spawner that we need to spawn the zone. So back inside here, inside of the game state, then basically when players are connecting, then at some point here, we're going to start the match countdown. So this will basically start the actual match. And at this point, we want to spawn in our zone. So if we put this to the side a little bit, then we want to drag out of here, type in get all actors of class. And this is going to be our zone spawner. So zone spawner. Then we're going to get a copy of the one at index 0, because we put 1 inside of the world here manually. So it will always be at index 0. And then in here, we're going to call that event that we made earlier called spawn zone, which exists inside of the zone spawner. So at this point, the countdown hits 0. So the players will spawn into the airplane, which we see over here. But before we spawn the players into the airplane, we want to spawn the actual zone. And then next up, we want to basically set our zone countdown, which is defaulted to -1. We then want to basically set it to our value of time between zones. So to this value. So at that point, the zone countdown will basically be set to 25. That means the rep notify fires. Make sure you hook this back up again. That makes sure the rep notify fires. And then in here, we're going to be coding the logic to communicate to the zone that it needs to shrink. And then pause again, shrink, pause again, etc. So first of all, yes, this is a rep countdown, so it happens on the server and on all clients. But this logic, we actually only want it to happen on the server, and we're just using a rep notify here to make our life for coding this a little bit easier. So here on rep zone, we're basically going to drag off here and type in switch has authority. And then we basically only want to be shrinking the zone when the game hasn't ended yet. And as we saw in the previous video, when we set up the logic for determining the winner, we can basically then conclude that the game is still ongoing if we do not have a winner name. So if we drag in our winner name, then we're going to type is empty. So if the winner name is empty, that means the match is still ongoing. Then we want to basically keep doing the logic for shrinking the zone. Now, if the winner is there, so if somebody killed everyone else, then we want to basically not shrink the zone anymore and stop the zone shrinking countdown as well. So if the match is ongoing, that means true. Then we're basically going to get our zone countdown and we're going to say, is the zone countdown at 0? And then hit B and left click to get a branch. So if the zone countdown is not at 0, then we're going to call the countdown zone event, which is this one, which will then wait a second, subtract 1, try again. So then it goes from 25 to 24, we go again, 24 to 23, we go again, etc. And then if it is 0, then we basically want to set our zone countdown back to being the time between zones. So back to our initial countdown. So then we drag this in here, and then we drag this guy in here. So if we hit 0, this basically resets the counter back to whatever value you put in here. So back to the 25 seconds in this case. And then when the zone countdown hits 0, then we also want to basically shrink. So then we grab out of here, get all actors of class, and then the actor is our zone. It is our zone at get copy index 0, and then here we want to call our shrink event. So if we double click this event, then we saw that this basically gets the current skill, subtracts 250 off of that skill, sets it as the new skill, and then this actor will basically interp towards that new skill and shrink itself. So there we go, that's all logic for this. Then that's basically all the logic that we had for the game state. If we close the game state, then we can go back to our widgets here, go to game widgets zone, and then back to our little widget here. So this text, we had made a binding here to it. So if we double click the binding, then inside of here, we're going to drag in our game state, right click it, validate it. And then we're gonna get our zone countdown. So this is the zone countdown basically. Then in here we're going to type in, well, append. So string append is what we want, string append. We're going to plug that guy into here. And then the zone countdown will go in here. We'll do spacebar sec so that it displays 25 sec as in seconds. And then the valid is going to go in here. So this is a super simple logic for the widget. So the widget basically from the game state reads the zone countdown, plugs it in here, says 25 seconds, 24 seconds, and just updates this text over here with whatever the countdown is currently at. Let's hit compile and save, and then we can test it all out. And after testing it, I'll go over the entire logic again so that you guys understand it. So first of all, let's go quickly here to our game modes, gameplay, game state. Go to class default. So the minimum required players is set to 2. Let's change it to 1 so that I can just test it with 1 player right now easily. And then the match start countdown, I'm going to change it to 10. And the time in between the zones is 25 seconds. So that's fine. So let's give this one major test. We hit play. So now we see that the time till next zone is set to -1 sec. So that might not look so pretty. So if we go back once more to our widgets, then we go here, here. Open this function up, and then we can do a little bit of logic here. So we can say if this is equal to -1, hold B and left click at a branch. Then if that's not true, then we just want to plug this value in here. But if it is equal to -1, that means our that basically means that our match hasn't started yet. Then you can type anything in here, such as then we can type something in here like simple dash. So then if we hit play, then you see that by default it is time to next zone, and then just a little line there basically. So now we have the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Boom, we're in the airplane. So now if we look out, we see our huge Battle Royale zone, which is surrounding the island. And in the top right corner, we see our countdown till the next zone. So now if we jump out of the airplane, then let's go ahead and land somewhere at this loot box here. So here we see the zone, we see the cool zone material on it. And now it's going to be shrinking. So now it just suddenly hopped to a new skill, I guess. And 2, 1, and boom. Okay, so it goes super fast to the new zone basically. So we made one little mistake. So if we exit all of this, then we should go to our actors folder and then go to zone and then the zone itself. So here for the interrupt speed, we made one little mistake of not putting a value in here. So the value in here should be something like 0.1 is a nice value, because then it shrinks nice and slow. So let's test that once more. So guys, now we're testing in multiplayer with listen server with 2 players. So we got our client here on the left, and then if we hop out the airplane right now, and then I'm gonna go somewhere towards the edge. Let's go over here. Then we can test this now with 2 players. So then we get our server. We want to get him to the same spot kind of. So there you see our little bean client. We go flying in. Hoppa. Okay, so now we're simply going to be waiting for this zone to come in. Now the server, I'm gonna put him over here. So the server's gonna stay here and he's gonna be the one that's gonna be out of the zone as first. And then the client will put him safely somewhere inside of the map here. And a nice time between your zones, I figured, is something like 60 seconds. So if you do 60 seconds as time till next zone, then everything works very nice with these parameters. And then you have a very nice Battle Royale setup. Okay, so now we will see that the zone will start to shrink. So there comes the zone. So the zone is shrinking. And then we can see if the server here goes outside of the zone. So here comes the zone, the server goes out. We see that the server gets the blue screen and we see that he gets damaged. Now it did take a little while more. Like we see that this area is that area of the collision that I'm talking about. So perhaps over here in the circle, it is more accurate, but that is because my collision is not as accurate as the circle is. So look here, it is pretty accurate as you can see. So here my collision is like straight, but that's because I got like crappy polygon collision. But anyways, if the server is outside here, then we see that the server gets damaged and that the server sees itself in the blue. And then we see that the client is now in the blue. So the client starts getting damaged and the client sees the blue screen. So now we gotta get the client into the zone. I'm not sure if we can make it, but well, we see we get damaged and we see that the client sees the blue stuff. And there we go. So now we basically died. So the winner is the one on the right. And that's it, guys. So that's how we made the blue zone in this project version. If you like this video, then please give it a like and subscribe. If you want to mess around with this project yourself, you can download it on my Patreon. It is available there for only 20 bucks a month. You have access to my full Patreon, where I also have premium tutorials and courses. So if you guys check it out, I would appreciate that. We also currently have a Black Friday sale going on the marketplace. So all of our products are currently 50% off. So if you guys are interested in getting one of our 17 fully replicated multiplayer products, then go ahead and check that out right now. As always, guys, I appreciate you and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.